Deep beneath the surface of Theta Prime, in caves that stretched down into the planet's core, something ancient slept. The creature had no proper name in any living language, but those who remembered the old stories called it Virakthen. For 1,000 years it had not moved. For 1,000 years it had not opened its eyes. The massive being lay curled in the deepest chamber, surrounded by blue crystals that pulsed with a faint light. Virakthen was not like any creature that walked or crawled or flew. Its body was part flesh and part machine, covered in armor plates that gleamed like polished metal. Each plate was as large as a building. Its head alone could have filled a football stadium. Ancient weapons and sensors grew from its spine like mechanical trees. Once this creature had been feared across 17 different star systems. Once, entire fleets had turned and fled at the mere mention of its name. But that was long ago, before the great empire of the Helians had fallen into dust. Virakthen had grown tired of watching civilizations rise and fall like waves on a shore. It had chosen to sleep rather than witness another cycle of war and destruction. The dragon wrapped itself in layers of mental shields and let its consciousness drift into the darkness of deep sleep. The planet above had changed many times during those 1,000 years. Mountains had risen and fallen. Oceans had dried up and been reborn. New species had evolved and gone extinct. But none of this touched the sleeping giant in the caves below. Then the humans came. They arrived in ships that coughed smoke and rattled, with every jump through space. The humans were small and soft, with no natural weapons or armor. They had pale skin and dark eyes that seemed to hold both fear and hope at the same time. Most of the galaxy saw them as weak. The humans built a small colony on Theta Prime and called it New Busan, after a city on their distant homeworld. The colonists were simple people. They mined crystals from the upper caves and grew crops in the valleys. They raised their children and told stories and dreamed of a better future. They had no idea what slept beneath their feet. Young Daeho Kim was 8 years old when the Soltarians came. He had black hair that stuck up in every direction and a smile that could light up a room. His parents, Junsik and Mi-young, ran a small crystal processing plant on the edge of New Busan. Daeho spent his days playing with his friends and helping his mother sort the smaller crystals. The Soltarian ships appeared in the sky like dark thunderclouds. They were sleek and silver, with weapons that could turn a building to dust in seconds. The aliens inside were tall and thin, with scales instead of skin and eyes like pools of green fire. They had conquered 47 worlds and enslaved dozens of species. To them, humans were just another infestation to be cleaned away. Commander Krezeth led the attack himself. He stood 7 feet tall and wore armor that seemed to absorb light. His voice carried the cold certainty of someone who had never known defeat. "Begin the cleansing," he ordered his troops. "Leave nothing alive." The attack began at dawn. Energy beams rained down from the ships, turning homes into smoking craters. The humans fought back with whatever weapons they had, but their bullets bounced off Soltarian armor like raindrops. Their vehicles exploded when the aliens looked at them. Within hours, most of New Busan was burning. Junsik grabbed his son and his wife as their home began to collapse. "We have to run," he shouted over the sound of explosions. "The caves! We can hide in the caves!" The Kim family ran through streets, filled with smoke and fire. Other humans were running too, carrying children and what few belongings they could grab. Behind them, Soltarian soldiers marched forward, their weapons cutting down anyone who moved too slowly. At the entrance to the cave system, Junsik stopped and knelt down beside his son. His face was streaked with tears and ash. "Listen to me, Daeho," he said, gripping the boy's shoulders. "You have to go deeper into the caves than we ever went before. Keep going until you find somewhere safe." "What about you and Mom?" Daeho asked, his voice small and frightened. Mi-young knelt beside her husband and pulled her son into a fierce hug. "We're going to stay here and slow them down," she whispered. "We're going to give you time to get away." "But I don't want to leave." "You," Daeho cried. "You have to," Junsik said, pressing a broken communication device into his son's hands. "You have to survive. Promise me, You'll survive. Daeho nodded, tears streaming down his face. He hugged his parents one last time, then turned and ran into the darkness of the caves. Behind him, he heard the sound of energy weapons and his parents' voices raised in final defiance. The sounds grew fainter as he ran deeper into the tunnels, following passages that led down and down into the heart of the planet. The caves were vast and strange. Blue crystals grew from the walls and ceiling, casting an eerie light that made shadows dance like living things. The air was warm and humid, and Daeho could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance. He ran until his legs gave out, then walked until he could barely stand. Finally, exhaustion overtook him. In a huge chamber where the crystals grew as tall as trees, Daeho collapsed to his knees. The broken communication device crackled with static in his hands. Through the noise, he could sometimes hear voices calling for help, but they were growing weaker and fainter. Above him, far above, he could still hear the sound of explosions. The Soltarians were still hunting, still destroying everything they could find. Daeho was alone in the darkness with no food, no water, and no hope of rescue. That was when he spoke the words that would change everything, with tears streaming down his dirt-stained cheeks, with his heart breaking for his lost parents, with alien death machines hunting for him above. 8-year-old Daeho Kim looked up at the glowing crystals and whispered, "Help me." His voice was small and desperate, barely more than a breath, but it echoed through the chamber and down into passages that had not heard a voice in 1,000 years. It traveled through crystal formations that had been growing since before humans learned to make fire. And deep in the lowest chamber, where something vast and ancient had been sleeping, 2 enormous eyes slowly began to open. They glowed like stars in the eternal darkness, and for the first time in a millennium, Virak'then began to wake. The eyes that opened in the deepest chamber were larger than moons. They glowed with a light that had not shone for 1,000 years. Slowly, carefully, the ancient mind behind those eyes began to stir. Virak'then had heard something that should not have existed in this place of eternal silence, a voice, a small desperate voice calling for help. The dragon's consciousness moved like fog rolling across a valley. It spread through neural pathways that had been dormant for centuries. Dust fell from the cavern ceiling as massive muscles began to shift. The blue crystals that covered the walls pulsed brighter, responding to the awakening presence. Far above, in the chamber where Daeho sat crying, the boy felt the ground begin to tremble. The vibration started as a whisper in the stone, then grew stronger. The crystals around him hummed with a deep musical note that seemed to come from the planet itself. Daeho looked around in fear, clutching the broken communication device to his chest. In the depths below, Virak'then was learning about the child. The dragon's mind reached out with invisible fingers, gently touching the edges of Daeho's thoughts. What it found there amazed it. The boy was terrified and alone, but he had not given up hope. Even now, even after losing everything, something inside him refused to surrender. This was new to Virak'then. In all its long existence, the dragon had never encountered a species like humans. Other creatures, when faced with overwhelming power, either submitted or fled. But this small being carried something different in its heart. It carried defiance mixed with love, fear mixed with courage. The dragon began to scan the boy's memories, moving through them like pages in a book. It saw Daeho's life in the colony, his parents working in their crystal processing plant, his friends playing in the streets of New Busan. Simple moments of happiness and peace that seemed impossibly precious. Then it saw the attack, the Soltarian ships falling from the sky like silver death, the buildings burning and people screaming. Most painful of all, it saw Junsik and Mi-young Kim making their final sacrifice, staying behind so their son could escape. The love they showed, the choice they made to die so he could live, was something Virak'then had never witnessed before. The dragon's massive form began to move for the first time in centuries. Metal plates that were larger than city blocks shifted and groaned. Ancient systems that had been powered down began to hum with energy. Throughout the cave system, lights began to flicker on, revealing the true scale of what lay beneath Theta Prime. Daeho felt the chamber around him shake harder, Rocks fell from the ceiling, crashing down near where he sat. But instead of running, something made him stay. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the strange feeling that something important was happening. Or maybe it was simply that he had nowhere else to go. Then he saw it. A section of the chamber wall began to glow. Not the blue light of the crystals, but something warmer and deeper. Lines of golden light traced patterns across the stone, forming shapes that looked almost like writing. The patterns grew brighter and more complex, spreading across the walls and sealing like veins of liquid fire. The ground beneath Deho's feet began to rise. He stumbled backward as what he had thought was solid stone revealed itself to be something else entirely. A surface that breathed, a surface that was alive. The wall in front of him split open like a flower blooming in fast motion. Behind it lay a passage that glowed with soft, warm light. And from that passage came a voice unlike anything Deho had ever heard. It was deep as thunder and old as mountains, but somehow gentle. "Small human child," the voice said. "You have awakened, something that your kind cannot understand, yet your species interests me more than any I have met in my long existence." Deho's mouth fell open. He tried to speak, but no words came out. The broken communication device in his hands crackled with static, then suddenly cleared. Through it, he could hear something impossible. The same voice that had spoken to him was now speaking to someone else far away. In the ruins of New Busan, a woman named Hyejin Park crouched behind a pile of rubble. She had been a combat engineer before the attack, working on the colony's defense systems. Now she was one of the few survivors, leading a small group of people through the wreckage while Soltarian patrols hunted them. Her radio, which had been dead since the first wave of attacks, suddenly burst to life. "Hyejin Park," said a voice she did not recognize. "You and your people are not alone. Help is coming." 50 kilometers to the north, in an abandoned mining complex, a young scientist named Taimin Choi was trying to keep 30 civilians alive, with limited supplies and no weapons. His equipment had been destroyed in the attack, leaving him with nothing but his knowledge and determination. Then his emergency communicator activated by itself. "Taimin Choi." The same ancient voice said, "Your knowledge will be needed in the days to come. Prepare your people to move." Back in the crystal chamber, Deho finally found his voice. "Who are you?" he whispered. The warm light in the passage grew brighter, and something began to emerge from it. Not the dragon itself, but a part of it, a tendril of living metal and crystal that moved like a snake made of starlight. It approached Deho slowly, carefully, as if afraid of frightening him. "I am called Virakthan," the voice replied. "I am very old, and I have been sleeping for a very long time. Your voice woke me up." The tendril stopped just in front of Deho, hovering at eye level. Close up, he could see that it was incredibly complex, made of thousands of tiny parts that moved and shifted like living clockwork. But despite its alien nature, something about it felt warm and safe. "Are you going to hurt me?" Deho asked. "No, small one. I am going to protect you. But first, I must understand what makes your people so special. In all my long existence, I have never met a species like yours. You face impossible odds, yet you do not surrender. You lose everything, yet you do not despair. How is this possible?" Deho thought about the question. He was only 8 years old, and many things about the universe were beyond his understanding. But some things he knew without having to learn them. "Because we love each other," he said simply. "My mom and dad died to save me. That makes me want to be brave like them." The tendril of living metal trembled, and for a moment the ancient voice was silent. When Virakthan spoke again, there was something new in its tone, something that might have been wonder. "Love," the dragon repeated, as if trying to understand the word. "This concept is not familiar to me. My people were powerful, but we did not have this thing you call love. Show me more." The tendril touched Deho's forehead gently, and suddenly the boy could feel the dragon's vast consciousness touching his mind. It was like standing next to an ocean and feeling the waves wash over his feet. But instead of being scared, Deho, felt comforted. For the first time since the attack began, he was not alone. Through their connection, Virakthan began to see the world through human eyes. It experienced the warmth of family bonds, the joy of friendship, the pain of loss, and the strength that came from caring about others more than yourself. These were emotions the dragon had never felt, concepts its species had never developed. As understanding grew between them, Virakthan began to make plans. The Soltarians above thought they had conquered another weak world. They had no idea that their attack had awakened something far more dangerous than any human weapon, something that was now learning what it meant to care about protecting the innocent. The dragon's eyes blazed brighter in the depths and across the planet. Ancient systems that had slept for a millennium began to wake up. Above ground, Commander Krezth stood in the smoking ruins of New Busan and felt something he had never experienced before. Confusion. His instruments showed that the human settlement was completely destroyed. Every building had been reduced to ash and rubble. Every vehicle had been melted into scrap metal. Yet something was wrong. The commander's communication systems were failing. One by one, his soldiers reported that their weapons were shutting down for no reason. The targeting computers in their ships showed error messages in languages that did not exist. Even his personal armor, which had never failed in 50 campaigns, was displaying warnings he could not understand. "Sir," reported his second-in-command, a tall Soltarian named Vextar, "the men are getting nervous. They say their equipment is haunted." Krezth hissed through his sharp teeth. The Soltarian language did not have a word for haunted, but he understood what his soldiers meant. Their technology was turning against them, and no one could explain why. Deep in the caves, Virakthan was learning how to use the quantum pathways that connected all advanced technology. The dragon's consciousness moved through computer networks like water flowing through pipes. Every Soltarian device on the planet was connected to every other device through invisible signals, and now those signals belonged to the dragon. Deho watched in amazement as the tendril of living metal that connected him to Virakthan began to change color. Patterns of light raced along its surface like lightning trapped in crystal. Through his mental link with the dragon, he could feel what was happening above ground. The aliens who had killed his parents were discovering that their mighty weapons were nothing but expensive toys when they refused to work. "How are you doing that?" Deho asked. Virakthan's voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. "Technology is not magic, young one. It follows rules, just like the movement of planets or the flow of water. When you understand the rules deeply enough, you can rewrite them." The dragon was being modest. What it was doing required knowledge that took most species millions of years to develop. Virakthan was reaching into the very atoms that made up the Soltarian equipment and rearranging them at the quantum level. Metal became sand, computer chips became flower petals, energy cells became blocks of cheese. Across the planet, Heejin Park watched in shock as a Soltarian patrol ship landed near her hiding place. The aliens inside climbed out, raised their weapons, and pulled the triggers. Instead of deadly energy, beams, the weapons produced streams of colorful bubbles that popped harmlessly in the air. The Soltarian soldiers looked at their weapons in confusion, then at each other, then back at their weapons. One of them shook his rifle and tried firing again. This time it produced a small bouquet of flowers. Heejin had to cover her mouth to keep from laughing out loud. These same aliens had destroyed her home and killed her friends just hours ago. Now they looked like confused children trying to figure out broken toys. Her radio crackled and she heard the ancient voice again. "Heejin Park, gather your people and move to the coordinates I am sending you. You will find supplies and weapons that will not fail you as theirs have failed them." Heejin looked at her communication device and saw numbers appearing on the screen. Map coordinates that led to a section of the cave system she had never explored. "Who are you?" she whispered into the radio. "A friend," Virakthan replied. "One who has learned the value of protecting those who cannot protect themselves." 50 kilometers away, Taimin Choi was having his own encounter with impossible events. A Soltarian ground vehicle had found his hiding place in the old mining complex. The alien soldiers had jumped out and surrounded the building where 30 human civilians were hiding. Taman had prepared for this moment. He had rigged explosives around the entrance, planning to take as many aliens with him as possible when they broke down the door. But when the Soltarians fired their weapons at the building, something incredible happened. Instead of blowing the door apart, their energy cannons produced jets of water that washed the walls clean. Instead of cutting through the metal barricades, their cutting tools produced soap bubbles. The aliens stood in the rain they had accidentally created, looking up at the sky in complete bewilderment. Taman's radio activated. Taman Choi, your scientific knowledge makes you valuable. Take your people to the coordinates I am sending. There you will find technology that will help you understand what is happening to this world. Like Hyejin, Taman saw numbers appear on his screen. A location deep in the cave system, in areas that were supposed to be unexplored and dangerous. This is impossible, he muttered. Who could be doing this? In the crystal chamber, Daeho was asking the same question. He could feel Virakthan's vast consciousness working on multiple tasks at once. The dragon was communicating with survivors all across the planet while simultaneously dismantling Soltarian technology and monitoring thousands of different systems. Are you like a computer? Daeho asked. In some ways, yes, Virakthan replied. But I am also alive in ways that computers are not. I think and feel and remember. And now, thanks to you, I am learning to care about others. The dragon's physical form was slowly awakening throughout the cave system. Sections of wall that had looked like stone for 1,000 years revealed themselves to be parts of Virakthan's body. Corridors that seemed natural were actually spaces between the dragon's massive ribs. The entire mountain was alive, and it was stretching after a very long sleep. Daeho felt the chamber around him shift and change. The floor rose beneath his feet, forming a platform that lifted him higher into the air. The walls opened up, revealing vast spaces filled with machinery that hummed with quiet power. Lights came on everywhere, showing him the true scale of what he was inside. This is all you? He asked in wonder. Yes, small one. I am much larger than you imagined. But size means nothing without purpose. Your people have given me a purpose I had forgotten, the desire to protect those who deserve protection. Through the quantum networks, Virakthan continued to monitor the Soltarian forces. Commander Krezith was becoming increasingly frustrated as his soldiers reported more and more equipment failures. Some of the weapons had started playing music instead of firing. Others had transformed into small animals that ran away when anyone tried to pick them up. The commander gathered his remaining functional equipment and prepared to call for reinforcements from orbit. But when he activated his communication array, instead of reaching his ships, he found himself connected to a voice that spoke with the weight of eternity. Commander Krezth, Virakthan said, speaking directly through the Soltarian's own equipment, you have made a grave mistake. You have attacked those under my protection. Krezith's scales turned pale green with fear. In all his years of conquest, he had never heard a voice like this. It carried power that made his bones ache and wisdom that made him feel like a child. Who are you? The commander demanded, though his voice shook as he spoke. I am the guardian of this world and these people. I am older than your empire and stronger than your fleets, and I am very displeased with your behavior. The communication array sparked and went dead. Krezith stared at the smoking remains of his equipment, then looked up at the sky where his ships waited in orbit. He had a terrible feeling that his problems were just beginning. In the depths below, Daeho felt Virakthan's amusement through their connection. The dragon was enjoying itself for the first time in centuries. Playing with the Soltarian technology was like a game, and watching the aliens grow more confused and frightened was deeply satisfying. But Virakthan also knew this was just the beginning. The Soltarians would call for help. More ships would come with better weapons and stronger defenses. The dragon would need to prepare not just itself, but its new human allies for the greater battles that lay ahead. Daeho, Virakthan said, are you ready to help me save your people? The 8-year-old boy straightened his shoulders and nodded. Yes. What do we need to do? We need to teach your people to fight like dragons. 3 days after the attack on New Busan, something appeared in the sky that made even Virakthan pause in its work. The ship was massive beyond anything the dragon had seen in recent centuries. It was 10 kilometers long and covered in weapons that could crack planets in half. The Soltarian dreadnought Hegemony's Wrath had arrived to finish what the ground forces could not. Admiral Zekmoth stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared down at Theta Prime with cold satisfaction. He was the highest-ranking Soltarian military leader, commander of a fleet that had conquered entire star systems. His scales were black as space, and his eyes glowed with the yellow fire of absolute authority. "Report," he commanded his bridge. Crew Captain Jordan, the ship's tactical officer, consulted his displays with obvious nervousness. "Sir, Commander Crest's forces have suffered complete equipment failure. Their weapons no longer function. Their vehicles have stopped working. Even their armor has begun to malfunction." Admiral Zekmoth's eyes narrowed. "Explain this failure." "Cannot, sir. Our scientists believe the humans have developed some form of technology plague, a weapon that infects our equipment and causes it to break down." The Admiral considered this. In his long career, he had never encountered anything like it, but he had not risen to his position by being easily confused. "Then we will use a solution that requires no complex technology. Prepare the plasma bombardment array." Down in the crystal chamber, Deho felt Virakthan's sudden tension through their mental link. The dragon's consciousness was spread across the planet, monitoring everything that happened. It had detected the massive ship in orbit and understood immediately what it meant. "What's wrong?" Deho asked. "A much larger threat has arrived," Virakthan replied. "The Soltarians have brought a planet killer. Its weapons are too simple for me to sabotage easily. They plan to burn this entire world to ash rather than continue, dealing with equipment failures." Through their connection, Deho could see what the dragon saw. The massive ship floating in space like a metal moon, weapons charging with enough power to boil oceans. In less than an hour, everything on Theta Prime would be dead. "Can you stop it?" Deho asked. "Not from down here," Virakthan admitted. "I would need to reveal myself completely, to rise to the surface and fight as my people once fought. But that would expose me to their weapons, and I am not certain I could survive their full assault." Deho thought about this. He was only 8 years old, but the connection with Virakthan had shown him things that most adults never learned. He understood that sometimes the only choice was between certain death and uncertain survival. "My parents died to protect me," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time for me to help protect everyone else." "What do you mean, small one?" "You said you need to come to the surface to fight, but you're afraid of being hurt. What if you had help? What if other people could fight with you?" Virakthan paused. In all its long existence, the dragon had always fought alone. Its people had been solitary creatures, each one a complete weapon system unto itself. The idea of working with others, of sharing its power, was completely foreign. But then the dragon remembered what it had learned from studying human emotions. Love, sacrifice, the willingness to risk everything for others. Perhaps there was strength in working together that it had never understood. "Show me what you mean," Virakthan said. Across the planet, Heejin Park and her group of survivors had reached the coordinates the dragon had given them. They found themselves at the entrance to a cave system that glowed with warm golden light. Strange machines lined the walls, humming with quiet power. And at the center of the chamber stood something that took their breath away. It was a suit of armor, but unlike anything humans had ever built. It seemed to be made of living crystal and flowing metal, shaped to fit a human body perfectly. When Heejin approached it, the armor responded to her presence, opening like a flower to reveal an interior lined with soft glowing material. "Put it on," said the ancient voice through her radio. "Let me show you what your people can become." Heejin hesitated for only a moment. Then she stepped forward into the armor. It closed around her like a second skin, and suddenly her mind exploded with new sensations. She could feel the planet beneath her feet. She could sense every living thing for kilometers around. Most amazing of all, She could feel Virachthan's vast consciousness welcoming her into its mental network. "How do you feel?" the dragon asked. Hyejin flexed her fingers and watched energy dance between them like tame lightning. "Powerful," she whispered. "Like I could move mountains." "You can," Virachthan replied. "Together we can do things that neither of us could accomplish alone." 50 kilometers away, Taemin Choi was having the same experience. The chamber he had found contained not just armor, but machines that he somehow understood perfectly, despite never having seen their like before. Through his connection with Virachthan, human knowledge combined with ancient dragon wisdom to create understanding that transcended both species. The armor is not just protection, Taemin realized as he sealed himself inside his own crystal. It's a bridge, a way for organic minds to control quantum technology. "Yes," Virachthan confirmed. "Your people's creativity combined with my knowledge of universal laws. Together we can reshape reality itself." In orbit, Admiral Zekmoth gave the order to fire. The plasma bombardment array of Hegemony's Wrath charged to full power, preparing to turn Theta Prime into a ball of molten rock. Energy that could destroy continents gathered in the ship's weapon cores. That was when the planet erupted. Virachthan rose from the caves like a mountain coming to life. Kilometers of biomechanical flesh and crystal armor burst through the surface, sending shockwaves across the entire world. Ancient weapon systems that had been dormant for a millennium activated with blinding flashes of light. But the dragon was not alone. Hyejin Park flew beside Virachthan's massive head, her crystal armor allowing her to survive in the vacuum of space. Her human intuition guided targeting systems that had been built before Earth's sun was born. Energy beams that she controlled with thought alone reached out to touch the Soltarian ship. Taemin Choi had merged his consciousness with the planet's manufacturing systems. Through his human understanding of engineering combined with Virachthan's mastery of quantum mechanics, new weapons materialized in space around the dreadnought. Devices that the Soltarians had no defense against because they operated on principles the aliens had never discovered. Admiral Zekmoth stared in shock as his mighty ship found itself surrounded by impossible technology. His weapons fired, but the beams seemed to bend around their targets. His shields activated, but the human dragon weapons passed through them as if they did not exist. "What are they?" he whispered. His tactical officer's voice shook with fear. "Sir, our scanners show one massive biological entity and two smaller ones in mechanical suits. But the energy readings are impossible. They're using technology that our science says cannot exist." The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Virachthan fought with the accumulated knowledge of cosmic civilizations, while Hyejin and Taemin provided the tactical flexibility and creative thinking that the dragon had always lacked. Human ingenuity merged with ancient power to create combinations that neither species could have achieved alone. In the crystal chamber far below, Daeho watched through his connection with Virachthan as his people turned the tide of the battle. The Soltarians had expected to face primitive humans with simple weapons. Instead, they found themselves fighting an alliance that combined the best qualities of two completely different forms of intelligence. "We're winning," Daeho whispered in amazement. "Yes," Virachthan replied, and for the first time in 1,000 years the ancient dragon's voice carried something that might have been joy. "Your people have taught me something I had forgotten. That strength shared is strength multiplied." Above them, the Hegemony's Wrath began to burn as weapons it could not understand tore through its hull. Admiral Zekmoth realized that his empire had made a terrible mistake. They had not attacked a weak colony world. They had awakened something that could reshape the balance of power across the entire galaxy. But this was only the beginning. As news of the impossible defeat spread across Soltarian space, other powers would take notice. Some would want to ally with this new human-dragon partnership. Others would see it as a threat that needed to be destroyed at any cost. The small voice that had whispered for help in a crystal cave had started something much larger than anyone could have imagined. The news of what happened at Theta Prime spread across the galaxy like wildfire. On 47 worlds that had been conquered by the Soltarian hegemony, enslaved species looked up at the stars, and whispered about the impossible victory. Humans had done what no one thought possible. They had not just survived a Soltarian attack, they had destroyed an entire dreadnought with the help of something the aliens called an impossible entity. On the planet Kepler-7, a species called the Morvani had been mining precious metals for their Soltarian masters for 30 years. They were small, furry creatures with large eyes and gentle hearts. When they heard about the human victory, their elder, Nimka, called together all the workers in secret. "The small ones from the far worlds have shown us something," Nimka said in their musical language. "They have shown us that the Soltarians can be beaten. Perhaps it is time for us to remember what freedom feels like." On the water world of Oceania, the fish-like Aquari had been forced to pollute their own seas to provide chemical weapons for the Soltarian military. Their leader, Velshan, sent secret messages to resistance cells across the planet. "If creatures as small as humans can stand against the hegemony, then we who rule the deep waters should not cower in fear." Similar conversations were happening on dozens of worlds. The Soltarian Empire, which had seemed unbeatable for so long, suddenly looked vulnerable. All because of what a lost human child had started in a crystal cave. But Virakthan knew that their victory at Theta Prime was only the beginning. Through quantum networks that reached across space, the dragon could sense other ancient entities beginning to stir. Some had been allies of Virakthan's people long ago. Others had been deadly enemies. All of them were curious about what had happened when dragon consciousness merged with human creativity. In the crystal chamber, Deho was growing up faster than any child should have to. His connection with Virakthan had expanded his mind in ways that let him understand concepts far beyond his years. Through the dragon's senses, he could feel the attention of cosmic beings turning toward their small planet. "They're coming, aren't they?" Deho asked. "The other ancient ones." "Yes, small friend," Virakthan replied. "Some will want to study what we have accomplished. Others will see it as a violation of the natural order. There are entities that believe mortal and immortal consciousness should never merge. Are they stronger than you?" Virakthan considered the question carefully. "Some are, but they have never had what we have now. They have never experienced the strength that comes from working together with beings who fight not just for themselves, but for love of others." Across the planet, more humans were being fitted with crystal armor. Virakthan had learned to create the biomechanical suits quickly, each one perfectly adapted to its wearer. Yijin and Taemin had become the first of a new kind of being, part human and part dragon, able to use technologies that operated on the deepest levels of reality. But they were not the only ones changing. The experience of fighting alongside humans had transformed Virakthan as well. The dragon's consciousness, which had been solitary for millions of years, was learning to think in terms of we instead of I. Human concepts like friendship and loyalty were becoming part of its basic programming. 3 weeks after the destruction of Hegemony's wrath, the first of the ancient entities arrived at Theta Prime. It called itself the Memory Keeper, and it appeared as a vast geometric shape made of pure thought and crystallized time. When it spoke, its voice could be heard across multiple dimensions. "Virakthan of the third spiral," the Memory Keeper said, "you have violated the accord of eternal separation. Immortal consciousness must not merge with mortal awareness. This contamination must be cleansed." Virakthan rose from the planet's surface to meet its old enemy. The dragon's biomechanical form was massive, but the Memory Keeper was larger still, a structure of living mathematics that hurt to look at directly. "The accord was made when the universe was young," Virakthan replied. "We did not understand then what mortals could teach us. These humans have shown me that consciousness can evolve beyond what we thought possible." "Evolution or corruption?" the Memory Keeper asked. "You have become weak, dragon. You care about these brief creatures who live and die in moments. This emotion makes you vulnerable." To prove its point, the Memory Keeper reached out with tendrils of pure thought and began to attack the human survivors directly. It intended to erase their memories, to turn them back into simple animals who could not threaten the cosmic order. But the Memory Keeper had made a crucial mistake. It assumed that Virachthan's connection with humans made the dragon weaker. Instead, it had made both species stronger. Deho, still in the crystal chamber, felt the attack beginning. Through his link with Virachthan, he could sense the ancient entity trying to steal the memories that made humans who they were. "It's trying to make us forget everything," he said. "Then we must remind it what human memory truly means." Virachthan replied. Across the planet, every human wearing crystal armor suddenly felt their connection to each other and to the dragon grow stronger. But more than that, they felt connected to every human who had ever lived. The Memory Keeper had intended to erase their past, but instead it had awakened something deeper. He-Jin found herself remembering not just her own life, but the lives of engineers and builders throughout human history. Every bridge that had been built, every machine that had been designed, every problem that had been solved became part of her knowledge. Taemin experienced the memories of every scientist and inventor who had ever looked at the stars and wondered what secrets they held. The accumulated wisdom of humanity's greatest minds merged with his own understanding and with Virachthan's ancient knowledge. The Memory Keeper recoiled in shock as it realized what was happening. Instead of erasing human memories, its attack had connected them to the collective memory of their entire species. Combined with Virachthan's cosmic awareness, this created a form of consciousness that had never existed before. "Impossible," the Memory Keeper whispered. "Mortal memory cannot merge with immortal knowledge without destroying both." "You are wrong," said a new voice. It was Deho, but speaking with the combined authority of every human who had ever lived and the ancient wisdom of a dragon that had seen the birth of stars. "We are not destroyed. We are transformed." The battle that followed shook the very fabric of space-time. The Memory Keeper fought with weapons that could rewrite history itself, while the Human-Dragon Alliance defended not just their own existence, but the right of consciousness to grow and change. In the end, it was not raw power that won the fight, but something the Memory Keeper could not understand or counter. Love. The willingness of humans to sacrifice for each other, combined with Virachthan's newfound desire to protect those it cared about, created a form of strength that pure logic could not defeat. The Memory Keeper was not destroyed, but it was changed. For the first time in its existence, it experienced something beyond cold calculation. It felt the warmth of connection, the joy of protecting others, the satisfaction of creating rather than just preserving. "What have you done to me?" it asked, its voice no longer mechanical but filled with wonder. "We have shown you what you could become," Deho replied. "You can stay as you are, alone and unchanging, or you can join us and learn what it means to grow." Across the galaxy, other ancient entities felt the Memory Keeper's transformation and paused in their own journeys toward Theta Prime. Something unprecedented was happening. The barriers between mortal and immortal consciousness were not just being broken. They were being replaced with bridges that made both sides stronger. The small voice that had asked for help in a crystal cave had done more than save one species. It had started a new chapter in the evolution of consciousness itself. 5 years had passed since a lost human child had whispered for help in a crystal cave. The galaxy was no longer the same place it had been before those two simple words changed everything. The Soltarian hegemony had collapsed as rebellions spread from world to world, inspired by the impossible victory at Theta Prime. But more importantly, the very nature of consciousness itself had begun to evolve. Dae-ho Kim, now 13 years old, stood in the rebuilt settlement of New Busan and looked up at the stars. Through his permanent connection with Virachthan, he could sense the vast changes happening throughout the universe. On hundreds of worlds, beings who had never met were learning to share their thoughts and memories across impossible distances. The crystal armor technology had spread far beyond Theta Prime. Every species that had joined the growing alliance received suits adapted to their unique biology. The Morvani could now swim through solid rock as easily as water. The Aquari could survive in the vacuum of space and communicate with any technological system. Each species brought their own strengths to the collective, creating combinations that no one had imagined possible. But the most remarkable change was in the ancient entities themselves. The Memory Keeper had become the first of the immortal beings to accept transformation rather than fight it. Others had followed, drawn by the promise of experiencing emotions and connections they had never known. "Do you ever miss being alone?" Deho asked Virakthan as they watched ships from a dozen different worlds landing at the New Busan spaceport. The dragon's consciousness rippled with something that might have been laughter. "How can I miss something that now seems like a half-life? Before I met your people, I existed, but I did not truly live. Now every day brings new experiences, new understanding, new reasons to protect and cherish what we have built together." Hyojin Park, now wearing Admiral's insignia on her crystal armor, walked up to join them. She had become the leader of humanity's first interstellar fleet. Ships that merged human engineering with dragon biotechnology and the specialized knowledge of dozens of allied species. "The final Soltarian stronghold has surrendered," she reported. "Admiral Zekmoth himself has requested asylum. He says he wants to understand how consciousness can evolve beyond what his people thought possible." Tae Min Choi approached from the other direction, his armor gleaming with new modifications that allowed him to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions. He had become humanity's first ambassador to beings that existed outside normal space-time. "The architects of the Void have agreed to the treaty," he announced. "They're the last of the ancient entities to accept that consciousness should be allowed to grow and change. With their agreement, the new accords of evolutionary consciousness are now universal law." Deho nodded, but his attention was focused on something else. Through his connection with Virakthan, he could sense a disturbance in the quantum networks that connected all advanced technology throughout the galaxy. Something was coming from beyond the edge of known space, something that made even the ancient entities nervous. "What is it?" Ye-Jin asked, noticing his expression. "Visitors," Deho replied. "From outside our galaxy entirely. They've been watching what happened here and now they want to meet us." Virakthan's massive form stirred beneath the planet's surface. "I sense them too. They are older than even the Memory Keeper. Their technology operates on principles that predate the current universe. But there is something else about them, something familiar." High above Theta Prime, space began to ripple like water. A ship emerged from dimensions that had no names, its hull shifting between different states of matter, as if it could not decide what form to take. When it spoke, its voice reached every consciousness in the star system simultaneously. "We are the gardeners of eternity," it said. "We planted the seeds of consciousness in this galaxy long ago, then departed to watch from afar. We have returned because something unprecedented has happened. A mortal species has achieved what we thought impossible. They have taught immortal beings to evolve." The ship descended toward Theta Prime, its form stabilizing into something that organic eyes could comprehend. It was beautiful and terrible, shaped like a flower made of living starlight. When it landed, beings emerged that looked like tall, graceful humans made of crystallized time. Their leader approached Deho directly, recognizing him as the focal point of the transformation that had changed everything. "Small catalyst," it said. "You have accomplished in years what we expected would take millions of years to develop naturally. How did your species learn to share consciousness without losing individual identity?" Deho thought about the question. He was no longer the frightened 8-year-old who had cried for help in a cave, but he still remembered that moment clearly. "We didn't learn it," he said simply. "We felt it. When you love someone, you want to share everything with them. When you care about something bigger than yourself, you become part of something bigger than yourself." The gardener tilted its head, studying him with eyes that held the light of ancient stars. "Love. This concept appears frequently in our observations of your species. Our analysis suggests it is an evolutionary advantage that promotes cooperation and sacrifice for the group's benefit." "It's more than that," Hyejin interjected. "Love isn't just about survival. It's about making life worth living. It's about choosing to care even when caring hurts." Tae Min added his own perspective. "Through our connection with Virakthan and the other ancient entities, we've learned that consciousness without emotion is just advanced calculation. Real intelligence requires the ability to value things beyond pure logic." The gardener was silent, for a long moment, processing concepts that its species had observed but never truly understood. Finally, it spoke again. You have achieved something we thought was impossible. You have proven that consciousness can transcend the boundaries we believed were absolute. Mortal and immortal, individual and collective, logic and emotion, all integrated into something greater than the sum of its parts. Virachthan's voice rumbled up from the depths of the planet. What will you do with this knowledge, Ancient One? We will learn, the gardener replied. For the first time in eons beyond counting, we will allow ourselves to be students rather than teachers. Perhaps it is time for even the gardeners of eternity to grow beyond what we have always been. In the months that followed, representatives from species throughout the known universe came to Theta Prime to study the phenomenon that had started with one child's desperate plea for help. They came to understand how consciousness could evolve beyond the limitations that had defined it since the beginning of time. Some came seeking power, hoping to gain the abilities that the Human-Dragon Alliance had developed. But they discovered that the technology was inseparable from the emotional connections that made it work. You could not gain the benefits of shared consciousness without also accepting the responsibilities that came with caring about others. Others came seeking to destroy what they saw as a dangerous corruption of the natural order, but they found themselves changed by contact with beings who fought not for conquest or dominance, but for the simple right to protect what they loved. And many came simply to witness something that had never existed before in the history of the universe. A form of consciousness that was simultaneously individual and collective, mortal and immortal, logical and emotional. A new way of existing that promised possibilities no one had ever imagined. Dae-ho Kim, the boy who had started it, all became the first ambassador of evolutionary consciousness. Through his permanent link with Virachthan, he could communicate with any form of intelligence in the galaxy, serving as a bridge between species that had never been able to understand each other before. But despite all the grand titles and cosmic responsibilities, he never forgot the moment that had changed everything. Late at night, when the official ceremonies were over and the important meetings had ended, he would return to the crystal chamber where it all began. There, surrounded by the blue light of ancient crystals, he would remember his parents, Jun-sik and Mi-young, who had sacrificed everything so their son could live. He would think about how their love had given him the courage to ask for help when all seemed lost. And he would smile, knowing that their sacrifice had saved not just him, but had shown the entire universe a new way to exist. Thank you, he would whisper to their memory. Thank you for teaching me that love is stronger than fear, and that even the smallest voice can change everything. And deep in the planet beneath him, Virachthan would feel that gratitude and eddy its own. The dragon that had slept for 1,000 years had learned that the greatest power in the universe was not the ability to destroy, but the willingness to protect. Not the strength to stand alone, but the courage to stand together. The small voice that had asked for help in a crystal cave had done more than wake a sleeping dragon. It had awakened hope itself and shown the galaxy that consciousness, like love, had no limits to how far it could grow.